Hi, this is Mike L. We're here at the Toronto Fan Expo, and we're here with Dan DiDio. And what is your official title, Dan?
I'm co-publisher at DC Comics.
Okay. So I'm a big fan of the newer style of comics.
What do you mean by newer style of comics?
It's sort of like the more modern, sophisticated, more adult comics, like the rebooted Wonder Woman, the rebooted Swamp Thing, or something like that. A lot of guys on the show like the old Silver Age stuff, which I do love. But I think comics have to evolve, and so because of that, I like Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman.
How long have you been reading comics?
About 30 years.
Oh, really? And how old are you?
36.
Really? Okay. So you were fans of the other stuff and all that, but you changed along the way?
I
got tired of it, or you just?
I like both. I like the comics I read as a kid in the 1980s. I love those, but I love Watchmen, stuff like that. But I also do love Jeff Lemire's work. I love Brian Azzarello's work, Grant Morrison's work.
Yeah. No, I'm really interested in this.
Sure.
Because the reason why is that when we hear that level of dialogue, we have that type of conversation even with our own editorial staff. And so when we came out with the New 52, we try to diversify as much product as possible. Sure. And that's why you get something as wildly different as, say, a Wonder Woman, which really plays to a different sensibility and a different style of storytelling for that character, and then you swing all the way on the other side, which might feel incredibly retro, is something I worked on with Keith Giffen, which is OMAC. And the main idea was to try to get as much product out there in different flavors as possible to try to attract the widest audience possible. I mean, if we do one style and do one style well, that's great, but if an audience ever turns that off, then we're out of business. So we had to spread it out as wide as possible and attract all the different flavors. So that's why I love to hear these conversations, because, you know, Wonder Woman in particular as a character has had so many interpretations over the years, and it seemed like every time a new writer came in, or there was a new sensibility that was brought to that book. And when Brian came in, he had a very clear point of view, and we knew it didn't line up perfectly with everything else, but we knew that he had a very strong vision behind it, so that's why we got behind it and supported it as much as possible. So I'm glad to hear that you like it.
I absolutely love it. I'm also a huge fan of Grant Morrison's action, which I know has sort of polarized some readers.
Sure.
But it does, again, it throws back to the Silver Age, but it's still modern, it's still fast-paced, it's still sophisticated in the way it's told.
Well, there's so much great stuff that the comics have told over the years, and our goal is not to always throw it out and start over, or just constantly retell the same thing over again, but find ways to pick out what's the strongest bits and pieces and find a way to interpret them in a way that feels a lot more contemporary and plays to sensibilities that work today. I mean, that was the reasoning behind the younging down of the line. You know what, we wanted to get our characters in an age that was relatable, or at an age where we felt that they were still learning in their jobs, that they weren't so perfect in everything they did, because that just makes them boring. You know, so therefore we wanted to make it interesting in ways that we're learning with them and rooting with them. So if they fail, you feel their failure, but and you know they're going to keep on trying to do better and try to be better the next time, because that's what the heroes are. You know?
And you know, a lot of people complaining that Wonder Woman, oh, now she's 23, but comic book characters shouldn't age to me. Charlie Brown doesn't age, Bugs Bunny doesn't age. They're symbols, and I think that they're best kept ageless at the age that they were when they were introduced. That's my opinion.
Well, that's exactly right, and what happened was that's how we got ourselves into a lot of trouble with storytelling. The talent got older, the fans got older, the editors got older, and we brought our characters up with us. We started to give them the problems that we were experiencing as we were getting older. And then what happens when you push them into a corner, you don't want to break apart their lives over and over again, so we started to reinterpret the characters with next generations. And then what happened is we started getting a logjam on these multiple interpretations, and we started to fragment our audience. So the goal was not to fragment it anymore, but really come down to what we felt is the strongest, most iconic interpretations, and then build them out from there. And also try to stay at an age where they can be consistent. You're right, Peanuts doesn't age that much, and we were using The Simpsons as our argument, saying, well, The Simpsons doesn't change. You know, they're doing 20 years of Simpsons. They didn't run out of story, and they didn't have to, you know, he didn't have to be in college now, because you lose a lot of the charms of what make that character work if you kept on aging him up, and you got to play to their strengths.
Do you consider the DC reboot a success?
Yeah, I mean, you know, sales-wise, it's bigger success than we ever imagined it could be. You know, can we do things better? Of course. Certain books have surprised us. You mentioned Animal Man and Swamp Thing earlier. Those are big surprises for us, because those are books that people said, oh, we're going to do those again. And we said, yeah, we're going to try it. But again, when you have incredible creators like Scott Snyder and Jeff Lemire, I think what you did is you brought a fresh set of eyes in and a real hunger to make these things work, and seeing what worked about them, but not afraid to change things in order to add a new sensibility and lore to them to really make them stand on their own.
Okay, I've got one last question for you. If you're stranded on a desert island and you could only bring one DC comic with you, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I mean,
how about three? You can pick three.
For me, my Justice League run is the Len Wein run from the 70s. You know, mainly because, and it's just like anybody, sometimes the first books you read are the ones that you hold dearest to your heart. So I always absolutely love that. You know, I'm a monstrous Jack Kirby fan. The early Commandees are probably some of the best comics he ever did, which I just think is spectacular. And then, you know, when it gets really tough, it gets really push and shove. You know, there's some great Ra's al Ghul stuff with Batman that I love, and Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil. You know, it would be anything from before I started working there, I have to say. How about that? You know, because ultimately when you have the books that you worked on, you know how it was built, so you know what went into it and all the goods and the bads. So you look at it with a critical eye, probably more critical than you need to be. But when you see the other stuff in its purest form, there's a sense of enjoyment that comes with it that just can't be suppressed. So.
Well, I can say one last thing. I buy a lot of comic books, but I would say 90% of them are DC. So I'm a big fan of the work that you've done since you came aboard in 2005.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's, you know, I had 40,000 comics before I started at DC. And now I probably have about 41,000. I haven't brought any of them home, so I'm glad you're buying them and reading them.